Gendry mentions that Maester Mott considered Thoros a false priest, and Thoros agrees. He was sent to the Seven Kingdoms to bring the word of R'hllor, but he spent his time eating and whoring. King Robert was fond of him. I wonder why. And many enjoyed the sight of his flaming sword and melees. Lord Beric silences Thoros by saying, "Fire consumes. It consumes, and when it is done, there is nothing left. Nothing." The outlaws reach High Heart again, and the ancient dwarf woman calls Beric the Lord of Corpses, for the stink of his graves is fresh on him. The ghost of High Heart tells them her dreams. The Kraken King is dead, and Lord Hoster too. The goat sits alone in the Hall of Kings in a fever as the great dog descends on him. She dreamt of drums and pipes and screams making a great clangor, and of a maid at a feast with purple serpents in her hair, venom dripping from their fangs. And later, I dreamt that maid again, saying a savage giant in a castle built of snow. Suddenly, she spots Arya and calls her Bloodchild and Darkheart, bidding her to leave. When Beric explains to the old dwarf woman that Arya is being brought to Riverrun, she tells them to seek her mother at the Twins, for there is to be a wedding. She then demands a song as payment for her dreams. The same song she always requests from Tom, Jenny of Old Stones. Later, Arya speaks with Edric Dane, who is called Ned like her father. Edric tells her that he saw her father during the Hand's tourney while he squired for Lord Beric. He reveals that Beric was promised to his aunt, but that before he died, Arya thinks to her that was before he died, Arya thinks to herself. Ned tells her of Wyla, his wet nurse, he says is the mother of Jon Snow. She has been in the service of the Danes for years, and Ned is surprised that Arya's father never spoke of her nor of Ashara, Ned's aunt. He tells Arya that her father and Ashara fell in love during the tourney at Harrenhal, and that she killed herself after the war because her heart was broken. Arya does not believe the young Lord of Starfall, believing her father only loved her mother. She asks Harwin about it, and he confirms that Eddard and Ashara may have fallen in love at Harrenhal, but at that time, his brother Brandon was betrothed to Catelyn. He claims that Ashara killed herself, over grief of her brother, and tells Arya, "Let it lie, my lady. They're dead, all of them." When the outlaws come upon a ruined village, Arya thinks the Lannisters destroyed it, but she is told that the village was destroyed years before by Hoster Tully, because Lord Goodbrook, the lord of the village, had fought for the Targaryens during Robert's rebellion. Later, Thoros sees in his flames that Riverrun will soon come under attack by the Lannisters again, and he believes the ghost dreams that Catelyn and Robb are at the Twins. That night, Arya sneaks off while everyone else is asleep, feeling that their outlaws cannot be her pack if they want to ransom her off to her brother, mother, or Uncle Benjen. However, she is captured by the Hound while racing through the woods.
What a chapter, dude.
What a chapter. Yeah, there's an absolute ton to break down here. So I think really there's really kind of two things we should talk about. One, I think we can start with the Ghost of High Heart and the prophecies, and then do Arya and Ned, which we kind of talked a little bit about last time we were talking about Ned Dane and things like that, and we've talked a bunch about it before as well. And then really the third part of this chapter too, you can kind of talk about, well, she's getting captured by the Hound, you're heading towards the Red Wedding, which is something we've been seeing coming for a whole lot. Absolute jam-packed chapter here. But I think, Jimmy, let's start with the Ghost of High Heart and the prophecies.
Yeah, so this actually has one of my favorite ones that we feel like has already been confirmed, which is the slaying of a savage giant in a castle built of snow. And it's talking about the maid. So a maid at a feast with purple serpents in her hair, venom dripping from their fangs. And later I dreamt that maid again, slaying a savage giant in a castle built of snow. And this is so there's another allusion, I believe, beyond this. I think there's one more vision, I might be wrong, about a giant being slayed in a castle of snow later on in the series. I think maybe a Dance of Dragons. I might be wrong, so people can correct me if I am. But this is supposedly confirmed, and I believe a Dance of Dragons, where Sansa is building a castle in the snow, and Sweet Robin comes through and kicks it all.
Correct.
Now, the weird part about this is, if this is Sansa, so a maid at a feast, which we know Joffrey's wedding, right? With purple serpents in her hair. So what do you think the symbolism of the purple serpents? I'm thinking like for me, I'm almost thinking the sand snakes, but that's not probably it, right? Because they're not at the wedding. Um, but venom dripping from their fangs. What do you make of that piece of it?
Well, I think it's supposed to be the poison, right? The poison is
Is it
in
just poison?
it's the poison. It's the poison that's given to Joffrey, which is why it's called the Purple Wedding.
Right.
Is right is the but it's hidden sort of it's hidden in her hairpiece,
Yes.
and that's why people call it the Purple Wedding.
I guess I was thinking of snakes dripping from their hair, but I guess that could just be a symbolism of poison, right? Like it doesn't have
Mhm.
to be it doesn't have to embody somebody. I That's what I was thinking of, like who is this living in Sansa's hair, but I guess it doesn't need to go that far. But dreamt of that mate again, slaying a savage giant in a castle built of snow. So if this indeed is Sweet Robin plowing through the snow castle, and this is one of those examples where George gives us foreshadowing or prophecy, and sometimes it's fulfilled in the most random, almost inconsequential ways, right? Now, in that moment, it's very big to Sansa. She's just looking at this spoiled brat stomping through this thing that was giving her comfort. So, is it that, or is there something a little bit more here? Because it says that the maid slays the savage giant. Now, in the scene, she corrects Robin and everything. I think that there's a
Right.
little bit of an altercation there. But like, is this maybe foreshadowing that Sansa might kill Sweet Robin later down the road? Like, could that happen?
Yeah. I mean, maybe. I don't
I
know.
don't think, but maybe.
I
But
don't think
maybe.
that's gonna happen now.
I think that that's probably not a literal slay, right? I don't
Right.
think. But how cool is that though? For this to be fulfilled through the snow castle she builds being ran through by Sweet. I just think that that's so clever of George.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's another one of these things where we look at these prophecies. 'Cause when you look at the people who are, I think, are sort of like the big prophecy givers, right? Mira Mazder to Daenerys, Quaithe to Daenerys, the Ghost of Highheart to Arya, and then you have
Mhm.
Patchface as well, and then Melisandre. I think those are the big people
Good job.
who give prophecies. So here she's already given some things that have happened that really she would really have no other way of knowing. I dreamt I saw a shadow with a burning heart butchering a golden stag. Okay, that is Renly being killed
Mhm.
by Stannis. I dreamt of a man without a face waiting on a bridge that swayed and swung. Now that we haven't seen happen yet.
But we think we know what it is, right? It's
We do, yeah. It's going to be, yeah. It's going to be, uh,
Theon's dad dying from a faceless man
yes,
assassination, probably paid for by Euron with the dragon eggs or whatever else.
right. On his shoulder perched a drowned crow with seaweed hanging from its wings. Now, I've always viewed that as interesting because on his shoulder perched a drowned crow with seaweed hanging from its wings. Because in a way, it kind of makes it seem like Euron is the one that's doing it, but it also says it's a faceless man. And then I guess you could look at it and say, well, it's the crow is sitting on him, as in the crow is the one paying for it, as
Yes,
the
that's how
crow is
I
the
take
one
it.
that's watching it, right?
Mhm.
She goes on to say, I dreamt of a roaring river and the woman that is a fish. Uh, Dead she drifted with red tears on her cheeks. Now, this is from the previous one. This isn't in this chapter, by the way.
Mhm.
I dreamt of a roaring river and a woman that was a fish. Dead she drifted with red tears on her cheeks. When her eyes did open, oh, I woke from terror. All this I dreamt and more. So that's her first prophecy, right?
Lady Stoneheart.
Exactly. That part hasn't happened yet. Now, here in Arya 8, when she's giving her next one, I dreamt of a wolf howling in the rain, but no one heard its grief. I dreamt such a clangor, I thought my head might burst, and drums and horns and pipes and screams. This is all the Red Wedding, but the
Mm.
saddest sound was the little bells. I dreamt of a maid and a feast with purple serpents in her hair. So the purple serpents actually refers to the strangler, which is the
Mhm.
poison, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the strangler is a rare poison that looks like dark purple crystals, much like black amethyst, and makes the victim unable to breathe. The process of making the poison is known to the alchemist of Lys, the faceless men of Bravos, and the maesters of the Citadel. The maesters do not discuss subject beyond the confines of their order. The Ashai have one name for the plant from which the poison is made, and the alchemists of List have another for the name for the crystals, but the maesters call the poison the Strangler. Interesting, by the way, that the people in the Citadel know how to do it, and Oberyn is somebody who uses poison when he fights against the Mountain. Is it just because he's rich and influenced to do it, or is it because there's somebody at the Citadel who is the riddle? The Sphinx is the riddle.
Man, oh
I'm
man.
just saying. Okay. Continuing.
I love anything tied to the Citadel. Like
I know.
anything at all. I love.
Yeah, continuing on here. And later I dreamt that maid again, slaying a savage giant in a castle built of snow. So this could tie into something else as well.
It could.
Right? Because in the show, Sansa is really the one who is responsible for Ramsay's death. Right? Mm-hmm. You could maybe argue that if it goes the exact same way it's going to go, but we know it's not because she doesn't get married to Ramsay like in the show. Right? So we would have to imagine that it's the same maid, right? And you can't even use that to say, well, it's a fake Sansa, because it's not. In the books, it's a fake Arya, right? With Jane Poole.
Right,
so
right,
not,
right.
So
right.
it's not the same thing. She could still be the one to kill Ramsay and take Winterfell back, and then you could view Winterfell as that castle built of snow. And later I jumped that maid again, slaying a savage giant. Maybe it's referring to somebody who has risen to power as a savage giant. I know we look at the castle quite literally built of snow, but I think you could also make an argument, if you want to try to view this from a different angle or a different lens, that Winterfell itself could be a castle built of snow.
Yeah, well, and I think that season 8 tried to pay a little bit homage to this with Lyanna Mormont killing the other's giant. Remember that?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was their way of like wink, wink. But the reason why I like this being Sansa and Sweet Robin is because it shows that prophecies aren't always like word for word, obviously, but it also doesn't have to be this big thing. It can be this small, subtle thing, which at the time is massive for Sansa's character. But it's not big as in shaping the world, right?
Right. Exactly.
Or maybe it is. Maybe it's a butterfly effect, right? Like that. Maybe that moment is going to trigger Sansa to change and to start looking at things differently and whatever else, because she does have a very visceral reaction to it. So I don't know. I hope that is the fulfillment of that prophecy, because I think it makes us have to be a little bit more cautious about our interpretations and theories. I think that it's like a really sly play on prophecy. So I kind of hope that that's the answer to it, because all these other ones are huge, like they're massive, right? Like they all tie into something big. So for one of it to be a little bit smaller scale, I think it's kind of a nice balance to strike.
Yeah, I agree. And then we can talk a little about her too. So those are the prophecies she sees, and we know this is a lot of hinting at the Red Wedding. I mean, the themes, if you're reading this, are all over the place. You go back to Barrington Darien, or not Barrington Darien, Ramsay or Roose Bolton, excuse me.
Yeah,
talking, and we know that the Red Wedding is coming there. We can see some oddities there, right? I thought he was Jon Snow's bannerman. Well, maybe not so much anymore. We've gotten hints and hints about it. You can look at the townspeople and things, and that's honestly what Arya serves as throughout much of this book.
Yeah,
really, you could actually make the argument that Arya's role, outside of perhaps being the super assassin character who's going to go on to kill the Night King or whoever, or Euron in the books, or whatever her prophetic role is, one of the roles that Arya plays to the reader is that she is actually more so than maybe everyone but say Tyrion, is that Arya is a voice for these small folk in these books. Yeah. Because she is the one that's traveling throughout this ravaged war land, and we're not viewing the voices of the people around her as like generals or commanders or leaders of houses like you get in the chapters with Stannis, or the chapters with Catelyn and Jon Snow, or any of these other people, or anybody at King's Landing, really outside of Tyrion, just because Tyrion interacts with a lot of small people as he's like, walking around town and making the rounds. But so that is really Arya's role in the books. And so you get the small little things talking about the movement of troops,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have the
Military aspect, like.
Yeah, it doesn't have the context of, well, I'm trying to defeat these troops. It's
Yeah.
it's all hearsay stuff.
Yeah, you're right, because they're passing through the lands and they're watching we get to watch the land, and by land I mean people react to a civil war. I mean that's what this is, right? This is a huge civil war in Westeros, and she does provide that view. Also, she represents agency, right? Like she doesn't have agency in almost any turn, even when she's fighting her hardest, and even willing to change her gender at one point to be more of a boy, right? To have hopefully a better chance at surviving. And she's doing literally everything she can. She even commits her first murders and is still at that moment not really seeing much agency. In fact, the only agency she had was to take her life or not to take a life, which is probably why the House of Black and White ends up calling to her. And then we see her go through that journey. And, I think in power, she's also looking for the ability to make her own decisions. So she's a hugely important character as far as what it's like in this land to not be privileged. Also in this land, what it's like in the common folk to be a female over a male. And we see that transformation back to Arya and back to a lady at some point in this book. I think we've already passed that at this point, but it's striking that Arya is such a popular character, and it's not on accident. I guess I think George was meaning for this to relate to all of us small folk out there who are reading this, who also have to deal with the decisions of the powers that be in our daily lives and whatnot. My wife is reading through the first time. She's in Clash of Kings right now, and she's like, "Oh my god, I love Arya!" Like she loves Arya chapters. That's all she wants to do. She just wants to read those. She said Arya and Tyrion are just everything to her, and Daenerys. Those are her top three. She just loves them. She's not as sold on Jon Snow, which I find to be heresy, but she. And she said that she feels like Arya, it feels like a real representation would be like to live in a pretty hardcore patriarchy at this point in Westeros. And it's also just kind of fun watching her survive, I guess. Maybe not fun's not the word, but it's captivating.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the best things about A Song of Ice and Fire is that you get so many different point of views, and every point of view chapter offers really a different experience in the narrative. And that's one of the things, why I love going back and doing a reread where I'll just blitz through one character's point of view. And, we've talked at length about there's advantages to that and disadvantages because you don't necessarily get everyone's story. But, it's like Bran to me is still one of the most interesting ways to do a POV read, just because his story is sort of self-contained. Well, actually it is sort of self-contained. I will say sort of there. It is actually, sort of self-contained. He does interact with other people from time to time, but for the most part, it is self-contained. He doesn't really do a lot of interacting with other people. Early on, he does. Daenerys is another is one of the best because her story is also self-contained. It has a lot of impact to everyone else, but it's really the only one going on in Essos for most of the story until Arya goes over there, and then she's way over there. I will say it's kind of interesting in the Arya chapters. You don't really hear a lot of talk about Daenerys. You would feel like there'd be way more talk of the townspeople about things that are going on. On the other side of the war. I don't know.
How do they get that information though? I mean, the Ravens probably haven't made it there yet. And also a lot of it sounds ridiculous, but a lot of the messenger birds are being used for the Civil War.
Right.
I
know. Well, I guess I'm just saying when Arya is in Essos, I feel like we don't hear.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think I meant Westeros. I'm sorry.
Yeah. When Arya is in Essos, I feel like we don't hear in her chapters as much about Daenerys. You'd think that there's like a war on the other side of. I mean, really, I know it's still like a country or continent, whatever you want to know. Hey, I mean, there's still like some big stuff going on over there, right? I mean,
Maybe there is, and I'm just not remembering. Like I'd be
Yeah.
curious to pay attention to that because
Yeah.
I agree. I actually agree. I think there should be at least a couple mentions of it at
Yeah.
that point.
So we'll have to
Yeah.
pay attention to that when we get there, which will
You know,
be a bit.
one
But
of the things that you're talking about Bran, you're talking about Arya and all this stuff, and it strikes me that there are so many different parts of the story that are like coming of age in many ways, like between Jon Snow, even Rob indirectly through Catelyn chapters, Bran, Arya, and the only reason why it's all like a different flavor of coming of age, they're all in very different perspectives, or I'm sorry, different situations, and then we sit in those perspectives and experience it, and it never really gets old for me. I think the only reason why this works though is because of how well George formed families in a Game of Thrones and really gave us a sense that these families, even when dysfunctional, have a through line of loyalty or a connection of some sort. Even like Tyrion and Cersei have moments where they connect and they're like, we're Lannisters. Like we still get those moments. So I think the setup of the family dynamics in book one, which book one's not a short book, but he does it in a like these characters separate pretty quickly. So it's a really impressive what he was able to do. And then on top of that, you almost have coming of age, but then you also have coming of death. And you have Ned dying, you have Catelyn going to die. And to see what like how they see the coming of age from an older perspective, usually not something you get in a fantasy book. Most of the times it's a side character. You don't get like Gandalf, for instance, right? It's like this Frodo coming of age adventure farm boy off to do this amazing thing, but we never get Gandalf's perspective on how Frodo is changing. We might get some dialogue. We're not in his head. Catelyn, we see every emotion with Rob. Pride. She cringes at some of the things that he does. She disapproves of a lot of what he does, but at all times, it still feels like that's her son. And she puts being a mother above all those things, which is pretty interesting. So I think that like the reason why Arya's POV works and Bran's works and John's work and all of them are so strong is because George was able to pick the right people to be in the heads of. He always said he wished he'd done Rob. I actually am okay that he didn't. But also his success in setting up a believable family dynamic in book one goes a long, long way in the series.
Yeah, I agree. Like you said, you talk about being like a coming of age too.
Mm-hmm.
It is. I mean, everybody goes through that. Like all of the characters. I mean, not necessarily come through age, but everyone makes
They're
a.
growing up.
Yeah, they're all growing. Even Jamie, right? I would say to a
Mhm.
part because Jamie's lit. Even though, I mean, some people grow up in their 30s as opposed to
Yeah.
their 40s. You know, I
It's
mean,
like
it
his
just
life's been pretty easy thus far, right? Like he's just he's Kingslayer. He's a great soldier.
yeah.
Loves Cersei. Life's easy.
Yeah, I would say I would agree, and I would say that I don't think anybody does as much as Arya though.
Oh yeah, I think Arya. I mean, Bran's pretty huge.
Sansa,
If
I
you're
mean
going
Sansa,
from
I mean they all do. They all do to be fair, but I would say that Arya's is probably the most. If you had to pick one
yeah,
character, I would say Arya because she's put through more than just about anybody other than maybe
Daenerys is pretty rough at the beginning.
Daenerys and
And
John. Yeah,
yeah,
but I would say Arya is still probably the most. Just because with Arya we see her interact with so many different types of
types of
people
people. Yeah,
as opposed to you know, Bran it's really there with Osha, and then he's there with the now I'm
the
blanking on
Reeds.
the
The
Reeds.
Reeds.
Yeah, he's there with the Reeds. That's most of his story. John is there with he runs into Mance Raider and Melisandre and things, but John's also a little bit older, and then John dies, so you will have to see how ultimately
He's been
his
dead for 10 years.
yeah, his transformation goes, but Arya just has so many different people that she's interacting with that all
Mhm.
shape her, I think, in one way or another. And it's
And
just a
those
little
also
maybe it's just a little
absurdly
it's just
magical.
they're almost all magical except for the Hound. So it's just such a and it's way more brutal too. Like even
Yeah.
Sansa is in a terrible situation, but she's interacting with the Queen and she's interacting with Peter Baelish. Like she's still interacting with
Hers
these
is more psychological.
for sure. Yeah, whereas Arya is interacting with the faceless men, and then the
Murderers.
Hound, who's also a pretty brutal guy,
Mhm.
right? I mean, and even Syrio Forel, she's trained by like this master swordsman type, this master swordsman character. So it's all just. I think I would agree. I think Arya's is probably the most.
She's awesome. I love
Yeah,
her.
yeah, she's fantastic.
It's also
Okay,
George's wife's favorite character.
Yeah.
So she's definitely going to make it through the end, just so we
Yeah.
all
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Let's continue on here and let's move to the second part here, which is Arya speaking with Edric Dane. Now, we've talked about this, many times before, but I think this time I was thinking a little bit more about it, and it is weird. I still think that his name he's named after Eddard Stark, and even he has this character. Now, of course, he would have grown up and he would have believed whatever was told to him.
Sure.
So for him to have this story makes a lot of sense that Wyla is the mother of Jon Snow. That was also his wet nurse. I think that's pretty easy. But there's a lot of things that just don't make sense in it.
Oh, yeah.
I
It
mean,
stinks to high heaven, dude.
right, because I've looked over this time and time again, and this is how I first came to realize like none of this made sense. Like the problem with Wyla being Jon Snow's mother is the timeline doesn't add up.
At
Right?
all.
Because when Ned gets back to Winterfell to meet Catelyn, Robb is already born. So how could Ned Stark have impregnated Catelyn Stark, gone and met Wyla, who is likely a servant of Ashara Dane's, and the only scenario that makes sense for him to sleep with Wyla is that he takes the body of God, what's his name? Dane, Arthur Dane, and the sword back to Starfall, in which he still loves Ashara Dane, and maybe that's where he has the conversation with her. Hey, sorry, I married Catelyn. Here's your dead brother, and then that's when she kills herself. Well, then you'd still need 9 months for Jon Snow to be born, so the timeline doesn't add up.
And here we are. We have confirmed R plus L equals J here
Right,
live.
but that's how I began looking at this whole thing when I was like first doing it, because I did discover it on my own.
Yeah, you cracked the code
I
before going
cracked
on
the
the
code
internet,
on my own before I went on the internet.
which is really cool.
Yeah,
I
it was
love that.
great. It was great. And I was like, the timeline, it just doesn't make sense. There's no way that this could happen, right? How could Wyla actually be Jon Snow's mother? Ned Stark would have to have her pregnant 9 months earlier. Where is he going to run into her? Unless, I don't think, is the tourney at Harrenhal 9 months before? I think I've looked at this and I don't think that timeline adds up directly.
We'd have to,
because for Jon Snow to be born at R plus L equals J, there's still enough time because there's like wars that go on. They rage on for a year. Even if Lyanna and Rhaegar met and slept together the night of the tourney at Harrenhal, I don't know that happened. I think it is much more likely he takes her there, or we know he takes her shortly after the tourney at Harrenhal. So there's a lot of, you really have to dive deep into that for it to make sense, the timeline.
Yeah, and was the baby late? Was the baby early? I mean, we don't know those things either, right? And who really knows? But one thing I can tell you for damn certain is I don't see how Ashara Dane killed herself, but that's just me.
I don't believe she did. No.
Yeah.
Nope. No, I don't believe she did. I think the bigger part of this, I know everyone wants to dive into the theories, especially since it starts with the Ghost of High Heart and she's making all these prophetic things, and then you dive into Jon Snow and all of these things. But the angle I've never really looked at it is the Arya angle of hearing all of these things. It's kind of like when you're old enough to hear family secrets.
No, it's the worst.
When you're like at Thanksgiving and you start to hear some of the family secrets. Wow, maybe
your Uncle Ronnie used to cheat on Linda all the time. You're like, I don't care.
Right.
I don't want to know that.
Yeah, your mom is actually your aunt.
Yeah.
What? Type of
pass the gravy there, sweetheart.
Yeah, we had to hide the pregnancy. She was too young. Type of
my God. Just Appalachian things, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think that was for me this read through my takeaway from it.
Dang. Okay. Mine
just
was
because I've read it so many times that I tried to read it from a different angle.
Yeah, I just have always felt like if we can figure out why the hell they named this kid after Ned, who supposedly killed Arthur Dayne, if we can crack that code, I think we pretty much bust this thing wide open. And I'm curious about what exactly will happen with this character. We know that there was a chance that it was supposed to be Darkstar, like what Darkstar ended up being after the 5-year gap, and there being no 5-year gap, that he created a new character named Darkstar, which is what this character was supposed to take the role of. So now people wonder if there's going to be a conflict between Darkstar and old Eddard. I don't know. I'm not sure. Old Ned Dane is a big question mark going forward. But you also have to wonder, like, if something were to be done with this character, who would, like, let's just say like the parentage is something crazy. Like, how does he find out why he was named the way he was named? That's my question, I guess.
Well, yeah, exactly. He's
Like who
Eddard.
tells him?
He's Eddard Dane, and then he goes by Ned as well. Ned as well.
It's so
Like
on the
that's even
nose.
more interesting. And it's also the idea that he, you know, he's born to this. He's born to like the sister of Ashara Dane, right? And he's too young. And maybe this was I don't know. It's hard to say, but maybe this was actually a mistake by George, or maybe in his mind he had planned this character. We know with the time jump
Mhm.
and everything to be something else, because the timeline of him unfortunately doesn't really work out for it to be like actually that situation where maybe he's actually a Dane's son, and he's actually like he is perhaps Ned's son, like the Jon Snow situation. But the timeline doesn't work out for it, unfortunately, because it says he's born in 287. And again, maybe, these things aren't like 100% accurate, these things, because even if you want to go by, if it says it in A World of Ice and Fire, let's see,
Mhm.
where's it? Yeah. It's all calculations based upon what he said or anything. So you could make an argument, well, so maybe the calculations are off, maybe his description, you're viewing it through an unreliable narrator or anything. Like, to me, if anything, it makes more sense that Ned gets to Starfall, sleeps with Ashara Dane. Ashara Dane fakes her death, because we know that Septa Lemore has
So I was gonna say, so you think Lamore might be a Chardonnay?
if Lemore is Ashara Dane, we know Tyrion describes her as having stretch marks or a scar or something like that. I have to go back and look exactly what it is, but
Like basically shows
the
childbirth.
indication, the indication that she's given birth to a child, that it makes more sense that he would actually be Ashara Dane's child, and it's his mother is, because his father is unknown, and we know that his mother is, we do know his mother's name, I believe. Look at the family tree. Oh no, we don't know. Just Lord Dane
No,
and
we
an
don't know.
unknown wife. Yeah, we don't know at all. Exactly.
Yeah, it's absurd. It's absurdly open ended on
Yeah. So
purpose.
if anything, it makes more sense that he could actually be Ned's actual
Bastard.
bastard son. Ned gets to Starfall, says, "All right, well, I gotta say goodbye to Shara Dane," sleeps with her, and then like a year later, she gives birth after she's faked her death. And that makes the whole situation. That then does kind of go against the idea of, well, Ned is the most honorable person. He would never cheat on his wife, because that's like the whole deal, which,
Mm-hmm.
then you're kind of double playing with the, well, Jon Snow thing.
It's really hard to piece it all together. I mean, there's also, I don't know what the timeline looks like. There's no way that it could be Brandon's kid, right?
No way.
No way. Okay, I didn't think so. Just want to
No,
make
because
sure.
he
But
seems he's from every indication is that, and like the calculations by fans and everything, is
yeah,
that he's younger than Rob. So I'll read the calculation. This is from the wiki. So it says Edric Dane is estimated by Arya to be 10 or 12 in 299 AC. Edric admits that he is indeed 12 years old in 299 AC, which is in A Storm of Swords, or I guess this chapter. He says he's 12. That gives
Mhm.
Edric the following options: turning 11 or 12 in 299, and John, I believe, is 16. So even if he were like a year younger, he should be, say, 15.
Yeah.
So, but it could be that he's, I don't know. It could be that they told him the wrong age to cover the story up. I mean, it's one of those things where it's
Now we're going down the rabbit hole.
there's nothing to completely indicate, right, all of these things. So
why would a Chardonnay need to leave? That's always
yeah,
been like why fake her death, I guess. Like I don't know.
that's where you go into the idea that it is this much bigger prophecy thing about where that she knows about the Song of Ice and Fire, and maybe Ned doesn't, and Jon Snow and
Yeah, I would need to see
Rhaegar.
a good justification for her to be Lemore. Because like I've always liked that theory, but I've never been able to justify. I just need to look into it a little bit. It's been a while since I've done a big Ashara Dane dive.
Yeah.
Because isn't it the Sea Star is the other, or is that Quaithe? I think people think Quaithe might be
Shiera
Shiera.
Seastar was Blood Raven's paramour, so that should be like really old. I love people.
So
Think
people are thinking that was Quaithe. I remember that.
right.
So maybe next episode we open up with a little bit of Lemore speculation. That could be a lot of fun. I'm telling you, all this stuff, man. Talking about Arya, talking about the prophecy with Sansa, where she's at the end of the series, and then this stuff, like it just makes me want to read A Dance of Dragons so bad.
Well, yeah,
there's so much like stuff that we haven't uncovered yet.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it's one of those where you have to really put it together. But that it is still one of the biggest mysteries. And maybe George had it. And I think it's obvious where you look at later in the series that George has had a totally different plan for him going forward. But he is one of the most intriguing characters, because even if you view it that way, like why would somebody even 2 years later, or even a year later, right? If you get pregnant and you do the math and everything, would you really want to name your son after the person that in some regards caused your sister to commit suicide? No.
Salute Arthur Dane. Like I just don't.
It makes zero sense.
Yeah, I don't. There's something weird about all of this. I mean, I've also heard people say, that half hand is
make an
actually Arthur
argument,
Dane, and
right? You could also
went to be with him,
right.
You could also
just make an argument that it's George playing with, because it's technically Edric, not Eddard, right? It's Edric Danes, but he goes by Ned, right? And maybe it's just a cruel, I don't know, maybe it's just the way it works, and it's just George throwing us off in a different direction to hide a other theory.
And it could be like it's not exactly a 1-for-1, but the fact that they call him Ned, and maybe the fandom, we're all just looking into it a little bit too much, and maybe it just is really Edric Dane. But regardless, he does have a pretty big part to play, I think, going forward. I think he might end up being Sword of the Morning. So let's see.
Yeah. It is really interesting where Edric Dane is going to go forward, because clearly it does seem like George's plans for him have changed drastically.
And Darkstar was created of it. Yeah. Darkstar's a whole nother thing.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Well, that might be it for us today. I think here we could certainly come back and talk about this stuff again anytime, but I'm running a little crunch for time, unfortunately, today. So
all good, man.
All good. So with that, guys, we want to thank you for playing the Game of Thrones. And our next episode, we will be discussing A Storm of Swords, chapter 44, Jaime 6.
And if you like our podcast, don't forget to subscribe, like us, write a review, leave a comment, or send us a raven at btkcast@gmail.com or bendthekneepodcast.com.
We'll see you next time. And remember that winter is coming.